So in this video, I have an important update for you on a major win against a statewide magazine ban. Oregon Measure 114 and the firearm purchase permit and their magazine ban has been found unconstitutional and struck down with a permanent injunction. The court has now finalized its permanent injunction, but we need to talk about what happens now going forward because the state is not going to let this sit. But really quick before we jump into this video, if you agree that magazine bans are clearly unconstitutional, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe. Also want to thank one of the main sponsors and supporters of this channel, which is Kershaw Knives. Kershaw makes some of the best knives available on the market if you're looking for an EDC knife. I carry the Kershaw Iridium knife every single day for my EDC, and I cannot recommend their knives enough. Right now, if you go to Kershaw's website, they are holding a huge sale, and they're also having one of their big anniversaries this year, so they're releasing a bunch of new knives. I cannot recommend Kershaw knives enough, and if you go to their website and you order using the code 2024Scholar40, you can get 20% off of your order and free shipping on orders of $50 or more. And like I mentioned, right now they're having a huge sale as well, so it's a good opportunity to kind of double up and get a really good deal. As I mentioned in the intro, in this video, we're going to be discussing a huge win against a state magazine ban and then also a permit to purchase firearms and what is going to happen now going forward. Oregon Measure 114, which put in place a statewide permit to purchase and then a magazine ban, was recently ruled unconstitutional and struck down in its entirety. This measure, which passed in the state of Oregon, created a purchase permit for Oregon residents to have to obtain so that they could purchase guns going forward, and then also it created a ban on certain magazines that hold more than 10 rounds. Now, in response to Measure 114, the state was sued in multiple lawsuits. The case that we're going to be focusing on in this video and the permanent injunction that was issued was in the Arnold v. Kotek case. The Arnold case is a state lawsuit. GOA and Gun Owners Foundation, a bunch of other individual plaintiffs joined the case to sue the state of Oregon, challenge Oregon Measure 114 as a violation of the Oregon state constitution. Last time we talked about this case, I informed you that the judge in that case was hearing objections on whether or not maybe he should modify his order and what should actually be in the final order and whether or not that permanent injunction should be removed. And we talked about that a hearing took place and he denied those objections. And now he has issued his final order in this case, and the case is closed, and a permanent injunction has been issued against Measure 114. The order of the court finalizes the permanent injunction against the magazine ban and then also the permit requirement, and now closes this case in the lower court, but the state of Oregon is not going to let this sit. This still strikes a major blow to the state of Oregon and their gun control attempts, but like I mentioned, the state of Oregon has already indicated that they're going to file an appeal up to the next level. So we need to talk about what happens now and how this is going to impact those of you in Oregon. Now, when we've discussed the Arnold case prior, I informed you that the judge in the case extended the temporary restraining order, the TRO, which barred the permit scheme from going into effect, and he also granted a preliminary injunction originally, which barred the magazine ban also from going into full effect. This was a significant temporary win in the case. However, now the case has come to a full head and a full ruling on the merits of the case has happened and a review of the objections has happened, and now the case has been finalized with a final order. Judge Rossio stated in his order that the Harney County Circuit Court is issuing a permanent injunction under Oregon Revised Statute 28.020, declaring ballot measure 114 unconstitutional, thereby permanently enjoining its implementation. The order goes on to state that this court is preventing the undue burden of ballot measure 114 from being imposed on current and prospective gun owners who have a right to lawfully possess firearms for the purposes of defending themselves and the state against imminent threats of harm. The court, using its equitable power, declares and adjudges ballot measure 114 facially unconstitutional in all of its applications under Oregon Constitution, Article 1, Section 27. Ballot measure 114 is permanently enjoined from implementation. Now, in the order, he also gave the state of Oregon until December 8th to file their objections. And what would happen there is if they filed objections, then his order wouldn't be finalized. And there was a potential that maybe the order that was proposed in November could be modified or changed in some way. The state of Oregon, of course, did file those objections. And then there was a hearing last week on those objections. And the question was, would Judge Rossio adopt any of the objections and modify his order that was proposed in November? Now, here are the objections that the state of Oregon actually put forward. And, we're arguing that the decision and the order that was proposed in November, how potentially it should be modified, and their objections to what was said in that order. And there was a possibility that the court could accept some of those objections and modify his order. However, Instead, what ended up happening is he systematically rejected all of the state's objections. He also denied the state's motion to delay his final judgment on the case, which, they wanted a delay on his judgment pending their appeal because the state of Oregon is already signaling that they are going to file an appeal to this decision. So at that hearing, not only did the judge there, Judge Ratio, reject all the state's objections to his order, but he also did not withhold his final judgment while this case, was going to be going on appeal because the state said they're going to appeal. They wanted a halt on the final judgment. They wanted a halt on that permanent injunction, but Judge Ratio said no, and now has issued his final order. The final decision essentially adopts the language we saw in late November and now has finalized that permanent injunction, which is now in place in Oregon. So for those gun owners in Oregon, you now have a finalized court order and a permanent injunction issued against Measure 114. You no longer just are relying on those TROs and the preliminary injunctions. Now you have a finalized order and a permanent injunction against Measure 114. Now, as I mentioned prior, the state of Oregon indicated to Judge Ratio, and they indicated during that hearing that they intended to appeal his decision. So they're going to do that. I have no doubt in my mind that they're going to file an appeal. So for those in Oregon, what does this look like going forward? From what I can tell, looking at the Oregon procedures, because again, I practice in California, I'm not super familiar with the Oregon structure there in state courts, but from what I can tell, the Oregon State Court of Appeals has 13 elected judges which sit on the Court of Appeals and are essentially divided in 4 panels which consider these types of matters and these types of appeals. Now, what ends up happening is the circuit judge there, the chief judge, which sits over the Court of Appeals, assigns cases to these divided panels. So when Oregon appeals Judge Ratio's decision, the case will be assigned to one of the 4 panels, and it will be assigned by the chief judge, which is in charge in the state of Oregon. The chief judge participates in each panel as a non-voting judge and also substitutes as a voting judge in the place of any judge who's maybe on a panel who has a conflict of interest or cannot be involved in a specific case that is assigned to them. After reviewing an appeal, the selected panel may decide to either agree with the lower court's decision or draft a new opinion on appeal that explains maybe why the panel is reversing what the lower court said. Of course, kind of traditional of what happens on review. And any panel member, of course, who disagrees can still file a dissent. That happens also in the state court levels. And what ends up happening is the panel reviews the opinion, reviews the dissent, it goes to the chief judge before they ultimately adopt and revise any decision. And then what happens is once the panel adopts an opinion, it is circulated to all 13 appeals court judges for a comment. Or what could happen is if maybe someone disagrees with what the panel says, well, then there can be a request for a reconsideration en banc, which is a review by the full 13-judge court. So kind of that is how the state process for appeal is going to go going forward. That's kind of the track that this case is going to see now going forward because, again, no doubt that the state of Oregon is going to appeal. They've indicated that they are. I have no doubt that they will. And for those kind of familiar with the Ninth Circuit and how that process works in the federal side, that's kind of similar to what's going to happen now at the state court level. The question now going forward is, when is the state of Oregon going to appeal, and who are going to be those judges selected for the panel who are going to review this going forward? I will say that looking at the makeup of the 13 judges who make up the Circuit Court of Appeals in Oregon, it appears that it seems like it's a very red contingency, maybe a conservative contingency of judges that sit on that appeals court. So it looks like there is a potential for a good makeup of judges regardless. However, I'm not super familiar with their track record. I'm not, again, practicing in Oregon, so I'm not super familiar with, how those judges operate, their prior decisions, but, just looking at a glance, maybe based on their political affiliation, it looks like there is a good makeup on appeals. But for now, the magazine ban and permit scheme is still halted through a finalized permanent injunction, which was issued by Judge Ratio. So again, that's what's going on in Oregon. If anything else changes, I will let you guys know. If you like this video and you would like to support the channel, one of the best ways to do that is to like, comment, and subscribe. All those things help to fuel the algorithm, and it signals to YouTube that you guys see value in these videos and in this type of 2A news. But regardless, thank you guys so much for all of your support. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And never forget, this nation was built by armed scholars, and this nation will be maintained by armed scholars.